Before we dive into the depths of this terrifying story, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, because you deserve stories that take your breath away. Let's begin. The Brazilian gravekeeper vanished on eclipse night and was never found. They said he didn't believe in superstitions, but they never found his body. With those chilling words, the old man who lives near Vila Orca Cemetery on the outskirts of São Paulo began his final testimony about the disappearance of the gravekeeper Marcelo da Costa, an incident that took place over 20 years ago. It wasn't a normal night. It was no coincidence that a total lunar eclipse occurred on the very night the cemetery gates were closed forever. Let me tell you the story as we heard it, those of us who were just kids in the neighborhood when Marcelo vanished. A story we whispered to each other at night, while the adults avoided speaking of it altogether. Marcelo was a stern man, tall, gaunt-faced, and lived alone in a small room attached to the back wall of the cemetery. He didn't believe in ghosts or the old women's tales about wandering spirits at night. He used to say, "The dead don't harm anyone. It's the living who create fear." But on the night of May 4th, 2003, everything changed. That day, an eerie silence hung over the neighborhood. Dogs stopped barking. Windows were shut an hour before sunset. Even the children who usually played near the cemetery wall suddenly disappeared, as if something had silently called them away. The much-anticipated lunar eclipse was all over the news. But in Vila Orca, there was no excitement, only whispered fears. Fears of ancient rituals, of the red night that came once every 30 years, when the earth opened its mouth to swallow anyone foolish enough to linger near the graves. Marcelo? He laughed it off. He refused his colleagues' offer to trade shifts that night, joking, "If the devil himself shows up, I'll ask him for a cup of tea and we'll laugh together." At 8:30 p.m., the moon began to vanish behind the earth's shadow. And then, the horror began. First testimony. The delivery man. I was delivering his usual order: cigarettes, bread, and a cup of milk. I arrived just moments before the eclipse. But as I neared the door, I heard a sharp, creaking sound, like a rusted gate opening inside my chest. Then footsteps. Not one, but many. Coming from within the cemetery. But the gate was locked shut with an iron chain. I dropped the bag by his door and ran. Second testimony. Little Isabella. I was looking from my bedroom window, which faces part of the cemetery. I saw Marcelo walking with an old lantern in his hand. He stopped, then lifted the light toward one of the graves. Then, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the earth moved. I saw gravestones tremble, one after another. Some emitted a soft blue glow, like cold fire. And then, Marcelo vanished into that light. I never saw him again. Third testimony. The electrician. I came the next day to fix the broken lighting cable. I entered with a police officer. We found the lantern lying next to an old, filthy grave with an unreadable name. On the ground, there were barefoot footprints, small, like a child's, but scattered in every direction, with no logic. And then I noticed something terrifying. All the dogs in the area were barking toward the cemetery, but not a single one dared to enter. That's when the real horror began. Once Marcelo was officially declared missing, the stories exploded. People claimed they heard his voice at night, screaming from beneath the ground. Teenagers snuck into the cemetery one night to hear it for themselves. They came back crying. One of them, his hair turned white in a single night, They said Marcello wasn't taken. He was summoned. And that the eclipse wasn't just a cosmic event, but a gate. A gate that opened because someone read aloud names from an ancient book buried near grave number 217. A grave with no name. Just a date. 1703. Undisclosed. In Marcello's room, a handwritten notebook was found. He wrote about strange dreams that began 3 days before he vanished. He described men with no faces standing by his window. Mysterious symbols were painted on the cemetery's inner gate. Archaeologists said they resembled markings from Candomblé, an Afro-Brazilian religion known for spirit-summoning rituals. The grave where the lantern was found, it vanished. Literally, it's gone. The ground beneath it turned into a bottomless pit. They tried to measure it. No one could find the end. The years that followed, authorities sealed off the cemetery. No entry was allowed. A taller concrete wall was built, with a sign that read, "Landslide risk. No entry." But everyone knew it wasn't about landslides. It was about fear. Fear of a repeat. The stories never stopped. Every time there's a lunar eclipse over São Paulo, someone in the neighborhood reports seeing a tall man in guard's uniform standing at the cemetery wall, staring at the houses. Then he vanishes when the darkness reaches its peak. One old woman swore she saw his face in her window. He had no eyes, only a deep, endless blackness where they should have been. 20 years later. On the night of the latest eclipse, São Paulo police received a chilling call. A child from the neighborhood whispering, "I want to report a man," digging a grave near a tree inside the cemetery. He's crying and saying, "Let me out. I'm alive." When the officers arrived, they found nothing, only freshly dug soil, and one set of large boot prints, matching the boots Marcello used to wear. Did he really disappear? Or is he still there, trapped between two worlds? Did he open a door that was never meant to be opened? Or was the cemetery waiting for another victim? On the right night? We don't know. But we know one thing. No one goes near Vila Orca Cemetery during an eclipse. Even if a voice from beneath the ground is screaming, "Please, get me out." The Curse of Cuiaça Cemetery, where spirits sleep with open eyes. I had arrived in the small town of Cuiaça in northern Brazil, searching for peace and isolation. I was a freelance journalist, roaming remote regions to write articles about local legends. But what I encountered there wasn't just a myth. It was an experience that carved a scar into my soul that will never heal. I got there on a July evening. Fog crept through the thick mangrove trees surrounding the town like arms squeezing the air. I rented an old wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, less than a kilometer from the abandoned Cuiaça Vilhajo Cemetery, a place deserted for 50 years. Locals said those who visited at night never return the same. On the first night, I heard light knocking on the cabin door. I rushed out but found no one. I assumed it was just the wind, but the next night, I was awakened by the sound of a woman crying. It sounded incredibly close, as if it came from right behind the window. I slowly pulled back the curtain, and I saw her. A woman in a white dress, stained with soil, her hair covering half her face. She stood in the fog, staring at the cabin without moving. When I tried to open the door, she vanished. Curiosity began to overpower fear. I decided to visit the cemetery in the morning. It was surrounded by a decaying iron fence with a gate that creaked strangely when pushed, as if warning me not to enter. The ground was uneven, the graves crumbling. Many headstones toppled or broken like someone had deliberately disturbed them. At the center of the cemetery, I found a headstone that read, Maria Dolores, with no date of death. Just one eerie line. She died, but she does not sleep. A chill ran through me. I took a photo of the stone and started digging through the town's archives for any information about her. On the third day, I went to the old municipal office. Papers were scattered everywhere, but an elderly clerk shared a strange story. Maria lived in that neighborhood 50 years ago. She was accused of killing her 3 children, then taking her own life. But the children's bodies were never found. Locals say they still hear their voices from underground on moonlit nights, and that Maria roams the cemetery looking for them. I chuckled internally. It sounded like just another urban legend. But then strange marks began to appear on my skin. Scratches, bruises. One morning, my name was written in fog on the cabin window, in handwriting that wasn't mine. I stopped sleeping. I made the decision to visit the cemetery at night. I brought a flashlight, a voice recorder, and a camera. I arrived at midnight. The fog was unnaturally thick. The cemetery was too silent. I turned on the camera and began recording, but the screen went black instantly. Then came the sound. Weeping. Then whispers. Then screaming. I ran toward the gate, but it was gone. The cemetery seemed to have expanded. The graves around me had changed and the ground trembled beneath my feet. Then I saw the children. 3 kids with empty eyes stood before me and said in one voice, "Take us back to our mother." I collapsed, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. They told me a man had found me lying unconscious in the cemetery. In my hand was a piece of paper with shaky handwriting that read, "You will write about us no more." I returned to my country a week later. I never published a word of the story. All recordings were gone. Every photo deleted on its own. Everyone who read my notes developed a severe headache afterward. And to this day, I don't dare look in the mirror after midnight. Because I often see her standing behind me. My name is Marina. I'm a forensic doctor who worked for over 10 years in the state of Paraíba in northeastern Brazil. I've never shared this story with anyone before. Not because it's embarrassing or unbelievable, but because it defies logic and shatters everything I've ever learned about life and death. It all started in September 2014, when I received a report about an unidentified body buried illegally in an abandoned cemetery called Granja, located in a small village deep inside a dense forest known as Mata de Cabra. A farmer had reported hearing faint sounds coming from underground and called the police, believing someone had been buried alive. I went there myself with the investigation team. The cemetery was disturbingly isolated. No paved roads, only a narrow dirt path, and a silence broken only by the caws of crows and the creaking of ancient trees. We arrived just after sunset. The air was stifling. No breeze at all. From the moment I stepped foot inside, I felt this cemetery wasn't just for the dead, but for those exiled from life itself. The grave the farmer mentioned had clearly been dug recently. The soil was still moist. We ordered it to be exhumed. It wasn't easy, but what we found was completely unexpected. A corpse of a man in his 30s, face twisted as if he'd been screaming when buried. His hands were bound with steel wire, and most disturbing of all, his body wasn't completely cold. It was slightly warm, as if life had only just left him. We immediately transported the body to the morgue for autopsy. And that's when the events began that would change my life forever. The next day, while preparing the report, I noticed something strange. All the equipment in the morgue shut down the moment I entered the room where the body had been placed. The heart monitor began flickering, even though he was dead. I approached. Suddenly, the monitor drew a single heartbeat, then flatlined again. Then we heard knocking. Soft knocking, from inside the metal fridge. We flung the door open. Nothing. But on the inside of the fridge door, there was a wet handprint. Small, like a child's. There were no children around. No hand had reached inside. I returned to Granja Cemetery alone. I needed answers. I arrived around midnight. I brought a thermal camera and a voice recorder. I sat near the grave and asked aloud, "Who are you? And why were you buried here?" There was a moment of silence. Then, I heard a voice. A whisper, rising from the soil. "Don't unearth my grave. Don't wake me." I ran. But when I looked back, someone was standing over the grave. A fine, tall, pale man with no eyes. He was staring directly at me, without moving. I went to the municipal archives to search old records. I found a file on Granja Cemetery from the 19th century. It had once been used as a prison for outcasts, witches, and the mentally ill. But what shocked me most was that the grave, where we found the man, had originally belonged to a woman named Rosa Coelho. Convicted of witchcraft and ritual murder, executed and buried alive. If Rosa was the one buried there, then who was the man we found? And why was his soul trapped in a grave that wasn't his? I decided to close the case for good. I returned to the cemetery one last time, bringing a jar of oil and a piece of paper with incantations from an old manuscript seized by police in a similar case. I wanted to calm the grave, as advised by a local priest. I began the ritual. Everything was still, until I read her name aloud. Rosa Coelho, come out of the shadows. The ground exploded. A black, bony hand burst from the earth and grabbed my wrist. I screamed, tried to pull away, but it was cold and hard as stone. Then I heard her voice, clear and near. They brought me back. I no longer belonged to either world. I barely escaped, splashing the oil and setting the soil ablaze. The entire cemetery lit up in a strange red glow. Then everything vanished. The next day, all the graves were found burnt, except the one I stood at. Smoke lingered from it for days. Since that day, I've stayed away from forests and cemeteries. I resigned from my job and cut off everyone involved. But on some nights, when I lie in the dark, I hear soft knocking on my bedroom floor. Then a whisper says, "You dug up my grave. Now it's your turn." Voices from beneath the soil, still heard in São Luís Cemetery. No one spoke of it openly. The São Luís Cemetery, located in the state of Maranhão, Brazil, sat in the middle of a crowded neighborhood, yet remained isolated, as if an invisible barrier prevented the locals from getting close. It wasn't fully fenced. There were no guards. And still, no one dared enter after sunset. I grew up there. I saw it every day from my bedroom window. The graves were lined up in a messy, chaotic manner, some leaning, some cracked. But what caught my attention the most was the single grave untouched by time. A pristine, white marble tomb, with a red rose that appeared every morning and disappeared at nightfall. I didn't believe in superstitions or ghosts. I was a rookie journalist back then, always searching for strange stories to publish in a local magazine. When my friend Lucas told me about the voices people hear at night, coming from the cemetery, I decided to uncover the truth myself. Night 1. I went at night, carrying a small flashlight and a voice recorder. It was 11:45 p.m. I snuck in from the back, where there was no fence. The air was heavy and damp, oppressive, as if I had stepped into another world entirely. I walked between the graves, listening carefully. Nothing. Then, I heard it. A moaning sound. It wasn't a scream, but soft, sorrowful, coming from the direction of the white grave. I approached slowly, and the closer I got, the clearer the sound became. It was a woman's voice, crying and whispering something in a language I couldn't understand. I placed the recorder on the ground and began recording. Suddenly, my flashlight went out. I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't work. Then I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. I looked behind me. No one. I looked ahead. The white grave was open. But there was nothing inside. I bolted out of there and didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I showed the recording to a friend who specialized in audio editing. He enhanced it, removed background noise, and revealed something I hadn't expected. A clear sentence in a woman's voice. He didn't die. He's still here. I asked him if the recording could be a hoax. He swore it was authentic. I decided to return the next night. This time, with Lucas. Night 2. We arrived at midnight and sat near the white grave, waiting. An hour passed. Nothing. Then suddenly, we heard footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps moving between the graves. We pointed the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. But the soil near one grave looked freshly disturbed, as if someone had just dug it up and covered it again. Lucas whispered, "Let's leave. This isn't right." But I approached. I looked at the headstone. No name. Just a death date. 1907. Suddenly, the flashlight started flickering. Then it went out completely. And then we heard a voice behind us. "Leave. Don't disturb what was buried in blood." We slowly turned and saw no one. We ran out of the cemetery without ever looking back, searching for the truth. The next day, I went to the municipal archives. I searched through the cemetery records. There was nothing about the white grave or the 1907 death date. I asked a staff member about it. Her face changed as she said, "Listen, there are graves we don't touch. Don't record them. Don't go near them." That's what the last director told us before he was fired for night visions. That's when I realized this was more than just a spooky tale. The final return. I returned alone on Thursday night. When I got to the white grave, it was gone. Vanished. As if the earth had swallowed it whole. In its place there was a small pit, and inside it, a single wilted red rose. I sat on the ground, pulled out my recorder, and asked in a trembling voice, "Who are you? Why can't you rest?" Silence. Then, a soft female voice came from behind me, because I was never buried whole. I turned around. No one. But on my arm, there was a transparent, ghostly hand. It was weightless, like a breeze, and it gently pressed down. Before vanishing, it whispered in my ear, "Thank you for listening." After that night, something changed inside me. I could no longer sleep near windows. I stopped writing ordinary stories. Now I visit cemeteries, place down a recorder, and wait. And sometimes I hear them. Because some souls don't want to be forgotten. They just want to be heard.